Well, that is the story of our calendar, and well, how it came to be this way and that. Well, it is a collection of ideas from different times and different places and different people. But it's not really the only calendar to be developed or developing through all the thousands of years of civilization. In ancient times, different civilizations were developing in different parts of the world. Sometimes they had contact with one another through wars and invasions, or through trade or travelers passing through, and in this way ideas were passed on from one to the other. Sometimes, through entire civilizations did not even know of the existence of another, but all of them, in their own way, were trying to grasp the idea of time and to keep track of it in its own passing. And so they all developed their own different calendars. Sometimes they borrowed ideas from other societies, and sometimes they did not. The ancient Greeks had a solar lunar calendar. Their figuring of a month was based on the moon. Their figuring of the year was based on the sun. None of the ancient peoples knew the actual what actually caused the solar year. They did not know that the earth circled the sun and that it took 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 46 seconds. And well, that is what made a solar year. They figured their year from one solstice to another solstice, and from one equinox to another equinox. The winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. The summer solstice is the longest day of the year. The two equinoxes in the autumn and the spring are the days in which the light time and the dark time are equal lengths. The Greek calendars of the Boomdiaries, these were groups of 8 years, 8 solar years of 2,922 days, and 8 lunar years, 8 years of 12 lunar months each, are 2,832 days. There is a difference of 90 days. So, at 3 different times during the 88-year group, the Greeks would intercalculate 1 month so as to keep the 8 solar year group and the 8 lunar year. Let me say that again. Let's see. Groups. Yes. The Greeks would intercalculate 1 month so as to keep the 8 solar year group and the 8 lunar year group in place with one another, and also to keep the calendar date and the seasonal time in place. Later on, in 432 BC, a Greek named Meton, who lived in Athens, figured out a system that was more accurate. This was to have groups of 19 years instead of 8 years. These were called great years. Into these great years they intercalculated 7 months of various times. The Hebrews' calendars used the Jews started in the 3760 BC, which was, they believed, the date of creation. It was also a lunar or solar calendar with 12 lunar months in the year. Each month had 29 or 30 days. In earliest times, the beginning of each month was set by direct observation of the moon. Witnesses who first saw the new crescent of the moon in the sky would come forth and report it. They were carefully interviewed, and if their information was confirmed by astronomical calculations, the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court in the Jerusalems, would announce the beginning of the official new months. Fires were then lighted on the mountains or the mountaintops at night to signal to the Jewish communities that the new month had begun. In later times, messengers were sent out with the news. However, they did not always keep this lunar calendar in time with the solar year, which has in it about 11 days more than a 12-month lunar year. They did it by adding in or intercalculating extra months. The Calendar Council of the Sanhedrin was in charge of intercalculation. When the lunar calendar was about 30 days ahead of the solar calendar, they would add to the year a 13th month called Adar II, before the month of Nisan, when Passover occurred. In this way, they would ensure that Passover would not fall too soon in the winter rather than in the spring, when it was supposed to be celebrated. The Calendar Council decided when intercalculation was needed by the means of astronomical figures which had been handed down to them. Also, they used the calendar of nature to tell them when an additional month was needed to keep the lunar calendar in step with the solar year. It is written in the Talmud, the book of the Jewish law and customs, that the council would intercalculate a month if a certain date the barley in the fields had not yet ripened, the fruit on the trees had not grown properly, the winter rains had not yet stopped, the roads used by Passover pilgrims had not yet dried up, and the young pigeons had not yet become fledglings. All of these things were signs in nature's calendar. This system was used until the 4th century A.D., when the very existence of the Jewish Sanhedrin was threatened by unrest and persecution. If there were no Sanhedrin in Jerusalem and no calendar council to give them guidance, how would the Jews scattered all over the world keep a unified calendar and know when to celebrate their important holidays? It was for this reason that Rabbi Hillel II publicly announced the system of the calendar calculation which, up until that time, had only been known to the Calendar Council. Now these calculations could be used by Jews all over the world to keep their calendars accurate and similar. In the year 358 AD, Rabbi Hillel II adapted the idea of the Greek 19-year Metonic cycle to the Jewish calendar, which proved a regular, consistent form of intercalculation. This is the way it worked. In each 19-year span, there were 7 special years: the 3rd, the 6th, the 8th, the 11th, the 14th, the 17th, and the 19th. To each of these years, an additional month was added. This kept the lunar calendar accurately paced with the solar year. The Hebrew calendar was continued, or has continued, and is in use at the present time. Jewish holidays are still set and observed all over the world according to the Hebrew calendar. Our calendar, 1971, was 5,731 in the Hebrew calendar. At about 3000 BC, the ancient Sumerians had a calendar based on the moon. They had 12 lunar months, with 30 days in each month. Their months were named after events in their daily life. Some of these months were month of the lending out of the oxen, month of the brick making, month of opening the irrigation canals, month of plowing, month of corn harvest. Here again, we find a calendar year based on month moons, which is not as long as a solar or seasonal year, but we do not know exactly, or if, how the Sumerians intercalculated or made their calendar corrections. In nearby Babylon, from about 2000 BC, they also had a year of 12 lunar months, but here we know that they did not or that they did make a calendar correction. They simply added a short intercalary month when it was necessary. That is, when it was noticed by the priests, who, when they reminded the king that the year hath a deficiency. Later on, the Babylonian astronomers discovered what is called the phase relationship between the sun and the moon every 19 years. They saw that 19 solar years were almost exactly as long as 235 lunar months. 235 lunar months is what you get if you take 19 years of 12 lunar months each and add 7 months to it. So, from 382 BC, the Babylonians started adding or intercalculating the needed months in a regular, organized way. They added 7 extra months during the 19-year period. This 19-year cycle is called the Medic cycle after Medon, the Greek, who started its use in Greece in 432 BC. In other parts of the world, at about the same time, there was a group of people who had no contact at all with any of these other civilizations and their calendars, but who developed by themselves a calendar that was not only different from all the others, but was amazing in its accuracy. These were the Mayan Indians who lived in Central America. Their civilization began at an early date, but it was during the time from about 357 BC to 317 AD that they developed a calendar which was, even then, more accurate than the one we use today. The Mayans had a number system based on 20. They counted fingers and toes. Ours is based on 10, just fingers. They calculated their calendars, and they were based on a very exact observation the priests made of the sun, the moon, and the planet Venus. Their civil calendar was based on the solar year. It had 18 months and 20 days in each, and the 19th month was 5 days in it. This adds up to 365 days, which would bring to the Mayan civil calendar the difficulty we saw in all the other calendars, since 365 days is nearly 6 hours less than the true solar calendar. This would cause any date to fall earlier and earlier in the true season with this every year that went by. But the Mayans, unlike other people, did not correct their calendar by intercalculation. This is why. The Mayans had other calendars. In addition to their civil calendar, they had a lunar calendar, they had a Venus calendar, and they also had a sacred calendar. All of these calendars were arranged to go along in relationship to one another, like gears of different sizes. The calendars of different lengths were linked to one another. So repeatedly, every certain number of years, the different calendars would come into the same relationship with one another. One every 52 years, for instance, the day in a certain position in the week would fall on the same date. That was called the calendar round. If intercalculation were to be made in the civil calendar, it would destroy this relationship. So, instead of intercalculating, the Mayans would simply change the calendar dates by the holidays and farming activities when they began to fall into the wrong months. Their sacred calendar was 260 days. It was divided into 13-day periods like weeks, and it had 20 different daytime names running through the 13-day week. It was thought we had a 7-day week, but they had 10 different day names, and all the day names would not be used up in the first week, and we would be used for the first time in the second week. A period was considered lucky or unlucky depending on the day sign that it began with. People born in the week starting with the Sipatikl, the mythical water creature, would be happy and fortunate, but people born in a week starting with the Ektal, the wind, would turn out to be traitors and witches and had the power to turn themselves into animals. Each period beginning with each different day sign had a different prediction for people born during that time.